today we're going to look at the concept of Sade Sati, the 7.5-year transit of Saturn over the natal moon. And Sade Sati is a very, very important concept in Vedic astrology, kind of similar to Saturn return that Western astrology uses, but Vedic astrology gives a great deal of emphasis to Sade Sati. And there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misunderstandings about Sade Sati. So I wanted to clear that up today. And so Sade Sati, as we've learned so far, has 3 phases. When Saturn enters the sign before your moon, it's kind of the setup phase. You know, something, you're set up, something is about to happen, there's a challenge to your identity and emotional support. Now this can be, you know, you run for president. This could be you decide to get married and completely change your lifestyle and leaving behind, you know, it's sort of the setup phase. It can be you get a new job, you move to a new city. It can be a calamity, or it can just be a shift in your comfort zone. Just something new that you've taken on and off. And I see a lot of people get married in Sade Sati, as did I. People have children in Sade Sati, and that talk about, you know, if your first child, talk about losing your comfort zone when you have a child, because everything you knew about life starts to change. So it's not necessarily a calamity has to happen. That depends on the chart, and that can happen in any period. Now, certainly if you're running Saturn Dasha or Moon Dasha, in the Vimshotri Dasha system, Sade Sati will be harder, simply because you already got the challenges of Saturn and Moon, as we will learn that this period brings into our life. The second phase, when Saturn enters the sign of your moon, that's called the acute phase, which is where the things start to kind of pick up speed and start to blow up a little bit, you know, and it just gets really, all the contradictions come together. And so I call this phase a phase now you're kind of being forced to let go of your old identity and outdated sources of emotional support, which is the moon, and you're sort of struggling with finding this new identity. And then the final phase is you are being asked to adopt a new self-identity and emotional support. And if you don't do that, you don't work through the final phase, the end of Sade Sati can bring some really, really difficult challenges. And that's kind of what I work with my clients when I'm working through this period. But these are the 3 phases. This is when Saturn enters the sign before your moon, off your moon, and after your moon. So, you know, in order to understand Sade Sati, you've got to understand Saturn and the moon. And, you know, in the class that we're working on together, there's a whole bunch of things, and you can go to my website or my videos and learn more about Saturn. But I put a little summary here of what is Saturn. Saturn is pressure, of course. Saturn represents the hard truths of life. You know, he's kind of the planet that says, get real. He's the planet here on this earth. He's not interested in your belief and manifest. He's interested in, you know, Santa Claus is not real. That's Saturn's teaching. Saturn is the god of time. Time is running out. No matter how good, how well we live, how healthy we live, no, you will not live forever. You will get old. You will die. These are all of Saturn's teaching. And Saturn, you know, recognizes that nothing is permanent. So there's a lot of pressure of time in Sade Sati, in Saturn Dasha or Sade Sati. Oh my God, I'm getting old. I haven't gotten married. I haven't had children. I haven't found my career. So there's a lot of pressure that starts to build anytime we're under Saturn's gaze. And, you know, Saturn wants you to learn with the limits of being human. We are divine creatures, but we are limited by human laws under Saturn's gaze. And, you know, Saturn doesn't have a lot of interest in the moon, as we will see, in what the moon wants. And that's really why there is this clash between the 2 planets. So anyways, Santa Claus is not real, is the teaching of Saturn. And everything that insulates us from the harsh truths of Saturn, you know, poverty, death, suffering, you know, all of those terrible things that can happen and do happen in most lives, it's the moon whose job it is to shelter us from that. Just like our parents, when we are little, moon is the mother, we refer to the moon as the mother in the horoscope, just like our mother or our family insulates us from, we don't tell our children when they're born, oh, life is really hard. We give them, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and gifts, and to see that life is easy and you're protected, and it's very important. So moon represents all of those things of familiarity, that's what we call it, the home, that which feels like home to us. For example, I have an old chair in my where I can do my consultations in my office, and it is old and tattered. It's been around a long time, pretty much since I'd say probably the last 15 years. And I want to get a new chair for my clients, to sit on. It's a nice big chair, but my clients, whenever I mention that, they tell me, no, this chair makes me feel safe. It's familiar. So when they come in year after year, it's when they sit down in that chair, there's a feeling. It insulates them from Saturn. It insulates because they've had some good moments in that chair. So in a sense, we have that. We have our blankie or certain things that we are attached to simply because they're familiar, old things, or, an old couch. It can be an old, even your home. These are all and they're sentimental attachments. They're not real. I mean, you could get a much more comfortable chair, but they're sentimental attachments. They're just as important. And the thing with Saturn is he's not all that interested in your sentimental attachments. He's interested in what's real. So yeah, he'd like to get a new chair and say, you could definitely get a much more comfortable chair, but there's comfort in the old, in the familiar. And so the moon represents all those things that insulate us from Saturn's tough gaze, that life is hard. And the moon is also our memories, that we cling to, both good and bad. So as we will see, the better disposed Saturn in your chart and the better disposed moon in your chart, that's going to determine the end of the Sade Sati. I mean, the development of Sade Sati in your chart. So my goal as a counseling astrologer is to not to make predictions on how terrible things are going to be, is to help you strengthen your moon and strengthen your Saturn. And if you have a strong Saturn and moon, you can have some phenomenal results in Sade Sati. So here we, just briefly, Saturn is the hard truths of life. And you can go back and study more about Saturn, because you can never learn enough about Saturn or the moon. But just to understand Sade Sati, moon is what makes us feel safe in life and keeps all the dark things, the difficulties of life, just like the mother's lap or a hug that prevents us from, it's our emotional filter, which allows us to feel good and feel safe. And not necessarily because we're in a safe place. It's simply because we feel emotionally safe. So you see, there are two very different types of planets. So Sade Sati is this clash of the titans, I call it, where, that should say clash, where what makes us feel safe and what makes us feel scared kind of clash together. They come together. So that's the coming together of Saturn and the moon. As Saturn enters a sign before your moon, off your moon, and after your moon in its transits. So the moon, in neuroscience, they call it the limbic system. This is where we store all our emotional memories and our memories of our childhood and our memories of even our ancestors are sitting there. And this is a sort of, from in our childhood, which make us feel safe. This is safety zone. This is our comfort zone. So when the moon is not well placed, unfortunately, your comfort zone can be crisis. It can be, being in very difficult, because we say the moon we keep going back home to us, as we know with children who are brought up in abusive, difficult situation. They tend to end up more in those situations in adulthood, even though it's counterintuitive. It's simply because somewhere in our brain, the system is such that feels safe. So the moon represents how we experience our feelings in our heart. What makes us feel this is our comfort zone. So if you take a look at your moon, and interpret the sign and the house of the moon, it will give you an idea. What is your comfort zone? Your comfort zone can be retreat. It can be work. It can be, working 18 hours a day. Again, it's a learned behavior. Okay. It can be, feeding other people, whatever it is, or financial security can also be your comfort zone. And then if you look at your Saturn, you will see where you experience fear and self-preservation, and how we experience that in this life. Our survival is Saturn, okay? And these two come, and that's what the astrologer is looking at coming together. And it'll get clearer as we move along. So Sade Sati, I call it growing up with Saturn. So what happens is when you're growing up with Saturn, the moon is our emotional lifelines. And in Sade Sati, they get severed. You just don't get what you think makes you feel safe. Your comfort zone gets taken away. So yeah, in Sade Sati, oftentimes we talk about loss of loved ones. In the old Indian books, they say the first Sade Sati, we lose our grandmother. The second Sade Sati, we lose our mother. The third one, we lose ourselves. That's 90 years, right? 30 years. And essentially, it's a metaphor, because your grandmother or your grandparents and your parents represent emotional lifelines to our safety and our security. And, they are going to pass. There's just no way that they're not going to. But it doesn't have to happen, although we will although it can, but it can happen in any period. But I like to use it more as a metaphor. Loss of things, of people, let's say, that we love. That they don't have to pass away. They can walk away. So often you see divorces. You see relationships ending, which were our comfort zone. But more than anything else, it's the loss of familiar. That is across the board. This will depend on the chart, and I'm not going in the prediction. But even without knowing the prediction, if you're looking at a chart and you're seeing Sade Sati active, one thing you can predict is loss of familiar. That that which you're familiar with, which is the moon, so maybe Renu will get a new chair in her Sade Sati in her office. But loss of what you're used to. So for example, a lot of people get married in Sade Sati because it's a loss of familiar, is it not? You're now, you were single and suddenly you're married, and we see children get born in Sade Satis. And although we say if you get married in Sade Sati, you won't get a honeymoon, because there'll be a lot of pressure coming from Saturn. You're growing up very fast. You don't get that honeymoon. Loss of community, you see. But again, that will be in chart. But one thing you can predict, even without knowing the chart, loss of familiar and loss of an idea that you're attached to. These feelings that you're attached to, that this, without X, I can't be happy. That's the mother, right? Without this security or that, I can't be happy, or with this acknowledgement. So the loss of an idea that you settled into your mind that was going to be your safety zone. So it's quite a beautiful period. It's sort of as we will see, it's a detox for our outdated memories and things that we are holding on to. Maybe as children, we adapted them as children, and now we are still holding on to them. And loss of faith often happens in Sade Sati, and often loss of stability of some type. But loss of stability isn't bad. If you want to do, big, great things, you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone. Let's say you want to go to grad school. That's a loss of stability too, is it not? Right? You had a stable job. You decided it was not, and so when Sade Sati starts, you're going to get up and go. So loss of stability is not always a bad thing. So I want you to stay with this, that it's not calamity. It's just that change that we fear. So, we've talked a lot in this course about Samskaras and about how we are, in our epigenome, we have intergenerational memories that we are hanging on to, that are within us, in our consciousness, up to 7 generations we have inherited. And so the moon in your horoscope shows you the emotional memories, not just of your childhood, but also of your ancestors. Their emotional experiences are living in our consciousness. And Saturn are our survival, how this organism is going to survive and feel safe. And so those are also our own childhood, what we learned from our parents and our experiences, but also the survival memories of our ancestors. If your ancestors were in the Holocaust, there's a lot of studies on that. Their survival memories are quite different from the memories of people who've not, Jewish people who've not been in the Holocaust. So these are sitting in our epigenome. So I've got a couple of quotes here. Behavioral epigenetics teaches us that traumatic experiences in our past or in our recent ancestors' past leave molecular scars adhering to our DNA. This is from Scientific American. And it's interesting, the word scars, I look at the word samskara, which is also sort of the genetic inheritance of your childhood and your ancestors that are living within you. And we followed this very closely in this course. And then there's another quote here, like grandmother's vintage dress. You could wear it or have it altered. The genome has long been known as the blueprint of life, but the epigenome is life's etch-a-sketch. Shake it hard enough and you can wipe clean the family curse. So as far as Sade Sati goes, I think a lot of the emotional baggage that comes to the surface in this period may not be yours. And that's why Sade Sati is difficult, because it just brings up these molecular emotional memories that just make us feel, that make us feel unsafe if we don't have that, as well as it brings up ancestral survival memories. And when these two clash, there's a whole, and I think, so generally in Sade Sati, it's more emotional than it is physical things happening to us. It just feels terrible, okay? Because we are bringing to the surface our ancestral memories. And as this sketch says, which is this quote says, we can, and I think of Sade Sati is it's the shaking period it's the Etch-a-Sketch being shaken. So we can wipe clean every 30 years these ancestral, the good memories, if you have a good moon, is great, but the dark memories and survival memories that we are carrying in our consciousness. It's a process through which we are clearing, the planets are clearing up some of the stuff that we are carrying in our consciousness. Let's see. So, Wayne Dwyer used to use this analogy. He was a New Age teacher. I think he passed away about 5, 7, 8 years ago. And I kind of, latched on to this analogy again to teach you what I did in the last slide, that, what I think of Sade Sati is that pressure comes from all sides, whether it's, you gave birth to triplets, or you got married and then you had 3 children back to back, or you got married and something else happened and your parents suddenly, fell ill, and you got all this pressure, and that kind of puts the pressure and squeezes the moon. The moon, Saturn is sort of on both sides of the moon, putting pressure on us. There's always pressure when Saturn is involved, whether it's in Sade Sati or in Saturn Dasha. And that releases, that squeezing process is releasing, I think of it as sort of squeezing out, releasing intergenerational trauma. And as Wayne Dwyer says, what comes out of you is what's inside of you. So it's not Sade Sati making it happen. If what comes out of you is total devastation when you're under pressure, that was already sitting inside of you, And so our job as Vedic astrology counselors is to help clean up the moon a little bit, so we can, I call this Sade Sati kind of like in Ayurveda, we do panchakarma. Panchakarma, when you go for detox, it's sort of a detox of our emotional memories, epigenome that we are carrying in our survival memories. Both are not serving us well, because, and I think that Saturn's job is to tell us that what you're seeing, which is what the moon sees, it's not an independent reality. It's a programmed reality that you've got it programmed from your childhood, from your early experiences, or from your ancestors. So kind of think of Sade Sati as this process through which you're kind of being, squeezed. and what will come out if you have a fabulous moon, some incredible stuff will come out. If you have a afflicted moon in your horoscope, yeah, a lot of darkness, but it's the darkness is being released. Trauma surfaces to be healed. It's a process through which every 30 years, nature allows us to heal intergenerational trauma as well as our childhood trauma. And again, if there isn't any trauma, you will coast through Sade Sati. It will not be a difficult Sade Sati. There's nothing, particularly terrible or difficult will happen. And again, when it comes to Saturn, if you've learned self-reliance, which is what Saturn is interested in, the pressure will be bearable. It won't break you. So again, it's not the Sade Sati. We always blame the planets. Oh, it's my Sade Sati. Planets are not making anything bad happen. What you're seeing, what planets are just reflecting what's in your consciousness, and it's happening. It's not the planets are making it happen. So what's the remedy? Let's look at the remedy in the rest of this video. So simply put, surrendering our outdated emotional attachments, things that we are still hanging on to because we don't want to grow up. Saturn is a mature planet. He's that old grumpy grandpa who's seen life. And replace it with maturity and grounded self-reliance.